A quorum being present, the committee shall come to order. Before we get to the committee's business, I would simply like to announce, in addition to a closed briefing on an important subject this afternoon at 4 o'clock, which all members have been invited to, next week we will hold a hearing on internet freedom on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And on Thursday morning, we will have a meeting of our Foreign Aid Reform Task Force, and I encourage all members to come to those. A quorum being present, as I mentioned, the committee is in order, and pursuant to notice, I call up HRES 252, Affirmation of the United States Record on the Armenian Genocide Resolution. In a moment, I will yield myself 5 minutes to make an opening statement on the resolution and 5 minutes to the ranking member to provide her views. Other members that wish to make general statements may do so by asking to strike the last word. Without objection, I may recess the committee from time to time. In addition, I may exercise the chair's prerogative under Rule 4 of the committee rules to postpone votes for the convenience of members. I will give members as much notice as I can on when such postponed votes will occur. And before we begin the discussion today, I'd like to recognize some special guests that are with us today. First, we are joined by 3 survivors of the Armenian Genocide. Anorik Emiyan, who is 97 years old, from Flushing, New York, Mr. Ackerman's congressional district. Charlotte Kukechian, 98 years old, also from Flushing, and from Chevy Chase, Maryland, at the age of 105 years, Uretsji Siraki Hoyan, residing in Chevy Chase, Maryland. We're honored and humbled by your presence. We also are joined by 3 distinguished members of the Armenian Parliament and 8 distinguished members of the Turkish Parliament, including the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Honorable Murat Mercan, and the Turkish ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Namik Tan. Finally, I want to make it clear that only members of the committee will be recognized to participate in the debate. We're not going to have members of the audience making statements or answering questions or participating in any other way. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Turkey is a vital and in most respects a loyal ally of the United States in a volatile region. We have also been a loyal ally to Turkey and should continue to be so. Be that as it may, nothing justifies Turkey's turning a blind eye to the reality of the Armenian Genocide. It is regrettable, for example, that Turkey's Nobel Prize-winning novelist Orhan Pamuk was essentially hounded out of his native country for speaking out on this subject. Now, I don't pretend to be a professional historian. I haven't scoured the archives in Istanbul looking for original documents. But the vast majority of experts, the vast majority, academics, authorities in international law, and others who have looked at this issue for years agree that the tragic massacres of the Armenians constitute genocide. In a letter to members of Congress 2 years ago, the International Association of Genocide Scholars stated the following, and I quote, "The historical record on the Armenian Genocide is unambiguous and documented by overwhelming evidence. It is proven by Foreign Office records of the United States, France, Great Britain, Russia, and perhaps most importantly, the Ottoman Empire's World War I allies, Germany and Austria-Hungary, as well as the records of the Ottoman courts-martial of 1918 to 1920, and by decades of scholarship. As crimes of genocide continue to plague the world, Turkey's policy of denying the Armenian genocide gives license to those who perpetrate genocide everywhere. The genocide scholars urged the House to pass a resolution acknowledging the Armenian genocide because they said it would constitute, and I quote again, recognition of a historical turning point in the 20th century, the event that inaugurated the era of modern genocide. In spite of its importance, the Armenian Genocide has gone unrecognized until recently and warrants a symbolic act of moral commemoration. Professor Yehuda Bauer, a highly respected scholar at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, has written that the Armenian Genocide is, in his words, the closest parallel to the Holocaust. In a 1985 report, a subcommission of the UN Commission on Human Rights found that the massacres of the Armenians qualified as genocide. And Raphael Lemkin, the Polish lawyer who coined the word genocide and drafted the International Genocide Convention, told an interviewer that, quote, "I became interested in genocide because it happened to the Armenians," end of quote. Nearly 24 other countries, including France, Canada, Russia, Switzerland, and Chile, have formally recognized the Armenian Genocide. So has the European Parliament. As the world leader in promoting human rights, the United States has a moral responsibility to join them. The Turks say passing this resolution could have terrible consequences for our bilateral relationship. And indeed, perhaps there will be some consequences. But I believe that Turkey values its relationship with the United States at least as much as we value our relations with Turkey. And I believe the Turks, however deep their dismay today, fundamentally agree that the U.S.-Turkish alliance is simply too important to get sidetracked by a non-binding resolution passed by the House of Representatives. At some point, every nation must come to terms with its own history, and that is all we ask of Turkey. Germany has accepted responsibility for the Holocaust. South Africa set up a truth commission to look at apartheid. And here at home, we continue to grapple with the legacies of slavery and our horrendous treatment of Native Americans. It is now time for Turkey to accept the reality of the Armenian Genocide. This will most likely be a difficult and painful process for the Turkish people. But at the end of the day, it will strengthen Turkish democracy and put the U.S.-Turkey relationship on a better footing. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I now turn to the ranking member, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, for her statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. The death of 1.5 million Armenians at the hands of officials of the Ottoman Empire almost a century ago was a dark and horrific chapter in human history, one which has had an enduring impact on the psyche of subsequent generations of Armenians. It continues to significantly influence the relations between the current nation states of Armenia and Turkey, and thereby impacts attempts at reconciliation between the two countries. This is also an extremely sensitive time for U.S. efforts in both Europe and the Middle East, and we need to ensure that our decisions and our actions concerning the resolution before us do not have unintended consequences that could place at risk critical U.S. security interests, our operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and our troops serving in harm's way. Without question, this is an extremely serious matter that requires careful consideration. Unfortunately, we're at a disadvantage today. The current administration, in contrast to the Bush and Clinton administrations, has chosen not to engage in any way prior to today's markup and has not yet decided if it will at all at some later point. Despite various congressional requests, it has not submitted any views or provided any recent documentation that could assist us in our committee in arriving at a decision before us on House Resolution 252. As such, some of us have reviewed information provided by the Department of Defense in 2007 and the intelligence community in 2009 in an effort to gain a more complete understanding of the different foreign policy priorities and important security interests at stake. Our colleague, Mr. McCall, has reviewed those documents. He has constituents serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and wanted to ensure that he fully understood the potential ramifications for their safety and the safety of all of our personnel engaging the enemy in these countries. The information contained in these documents had a profound impact on the way that he views today's markup of House Resolution 252 and what it could mean for our military operations. More broadly, as a number of our colleagues, including Chairman Ike Skelton of the Armed Forces Committee, cautioned in a letter to Chairman Berman and me earlier this week, and I quote, "This legislation will have very real and meaningful consequences internationally. While we can and should debate the best ways to defeat extremism and help strengthen our struggling economy, we certainly should not be considering proposals that will only further damage our country, both militarily and economically," end quote. Lastly, I would suggest that it does not help nor advance our nation's interests for the members of this committee to engage in a tit-for-tat to disparage either the Armenian or the Turkish government. To ensure that members have ample opportunity to express their support and raise concerns about this measure, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back my time. Thank you.
The ranking member has yielded back her time. Without objection, the resolution shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Members now be recognized to strike the last word or to offer amendments. The gentleman from New York, the chairman of the Middle East and South Asia Subcommittee, Mr. Ackerman, is for what purpose do you seek recognition?
I was hoping not to go first, but I guess the alphabet will have its way. I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this is not one of those issues that members of Congress look forward to voting on. I think it makes us a little bit uncomfortable. It's not as easy for most of us to just put on a sign that says yes or no without the kind of emotional involvement that so many of our fellow citizens have because of their mother country from which they or their parents or ancestors might have come from. And there's an argument to be made, and you've cited most of them, Mr. Chairman, that have been already before us and we've already considered. Turkey is an important, strong, necessary ally of the United States in so many efforts, in so many ways. The role that they play in the Middle East as an intermediary, the geographic place that in which they occupy being so important to the world scene, and their attitude towards democracy being the democracy that we point to that says democracy can work in Islamic countries. All of these are of great import to us. And then there's the argument of forgive and forget. Why don't we just ignore what so many have called to our attention and just let it go by the boards and not address it at all? But overriding all that, I think, Mr. Chairman, is the issue of justice and the issue of history and the issue of the historic record. It's like telling victims of a crime, well, it happened already, forget it. It's what kept rape victims quiet for so many years. It's what kept Holocaust survivors quiet for 40 years. You know, when you think about it, it was 40 years before Holocaust victims ever spoke up about the atrocities they experienced during the Holocaust. Forgive and forget. It's easy to say, I suppose, if you're not the one or party to the one who's been damaged or hurt. You cannot forgive someone who hurt somebody else, and neither can you erase the problem from your memory. If you forget an injustice, then it doesn't occur. If you forget something that was wrong, you will no longer be able to tell right from wrong, because wrong then goes away. I've given this a lot of thought and thought about it in personal terms, especially because we have those who still are around on this planet who say that the Holocaust involving the Jews committed by the Nazis did not occur. We hear it every day from the rantings of a madman in Iran. And some people laugh at it, and some people are confused by it, and some people are inspired by it, and some people say, oh, it's only words. And so many others say, if you don't confront these words, then it's going to happen again. And that's my concern here. There are in this audience, as you have introduced, two constituents of mine, among others, I'm sure, each of whom are 98 years old, Mr. Chairman. There was one that was here last year who's no longer with us. But these two ladies got up early in the morning in Flushing, New York, had some help in getting dressed, getting into a chair, being taken to the airport, being put on a plane, being taken off the plane, being put back in wheelchairs, coming to the Capitol, going through security, and getting to this room. They're 98 years old. They were alive at the time that this genocide took place, and they're here for justice. 98 years old. How long can they wait? Shall we tell them once again to come back next year? Mr. Chairman, history has to be righted. It has to be confronted. It has to be acknowledged. I'm concerned about the relationship that we have with Turkey, but that's a real relationship and it will endure. And I would point out that after the Holocaust, in which 12 million people were killed, 6 million of them being Jews, killed just because they were Jews, that this problem plagues us still. This is a matter, Mr. Chairman, that must be dealt with, and this is the day that we're going to deal with it. There is no comeback later for people, and there's no putting this vote off for us. I yield back.
The time the gentleman has expired. Who seeks recognition on the minority side? The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much,
What
Mr.
purpose
Chairman.
do you seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, in September of 2000, I had the privilege to chair a hearing on the Armenian Genocide. It was a 4-hour hearing, the first comprehensive hearing this House ever held on the Armenian Genocide. The testimony we heard that day and the accounts of the atrocities that I have read in articles and books both before and after that hearing, including the book by Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, who was our ambassador at the time, deeply saddened me, and I think anyone who was at that hearing or has even read some of the articles about the genocide can't be moved to tears about what they have read or seen. I would like to extend my condolences to all of those here and others who have lost family members to the genocide. And the existence of an aggressive Turkish government-sponsored campaign of genocidal denial was and is deeply shocking, and it's alarming. In fact, the Turkish government criminally prosecutes people for acknowledging the Armenian Genocide. Congress would certainly speak out if Germany denied the Jewish Holocaust, or if the Russian government put people in jail for mentioning Ukrainian Holodomor. The Turkish government's denial of the genocide of 1.5 million Armenians is really an outrage. Unfortunately, some have gotten used to it, or perhaps become desensitized to this assault on the dignity of the Armenian people. The issue behind this resolution, Mr. Chairman, is whether, when another government denies genocide, Congress has a responsibility to insist that our government at least acknowledge it. I believe that we do. We have a record of recognizing genocides, the Holocaust, the Ukrainian infamous famine wrought by Stalin, the Cambodian and the Darfur genocides. In 2005, I was the author of HRES 199, which recognized the Srebrenica genocide, and which had a very beneficial effect in clearing the political climate in Bosnia. The Armenian tragedy was, by any measure, a genocide. In 1915, there were about 2 million Armenians living in what was then the Ottoman Empire. They were living in a region they had inhabited for 2,500 years. By 1923, well over 90% of these Armenians had disappeared. Most of them, as many as 1.5 million, were dead. The remainder had been forced into exile. A few of those exiled are here in the audience today. The government of the empire, whose leaders were members of the movement known as the Young Turks, called this campaign against Armenians a mass deportation rather than a mass murder. But the United States ambassador to Turkey at the time, Henry Morgenthau, called it a, quote, campaign of race extermination. The British, French, and Russian governments accused the Young Turk government of a crime against humanity, the first time in history that that charge was ever made by one state against another. Though after World War I, the term genocide didn't exist, the whole world understood what had been done to the Armenians. The government of Turkey convicted a number of high-ranking Young Turk officials for their role in what the Turkish government indictment called, quote, the massacre and destruction of the Armenians. Unfortunately, the Turkish government later changed course. For Armenians everywhere, the Turkish government's campaign of genocide denial is a cruel slap in the face. It is not only the genocide of 90 years ago, but also the aggressive, ongoing official denial that brings us here today. I want to note here that this House, this Congress, this government of the United States is a friend to Turkey. But friends don't let friends commit crimes against humanity or act as accomplices in their denial after they have been committed. I would recall to you that in judging the post-World War I case against the prime movers of the genocide, the Turkish president of the court stated, and I quote, the perpetration of such atrocities is not only incompatible with Ottoman laws and the Constitution, but also is contrary to the dictates of the Muslim faith, close quote. I admire him for saying this. He said this for the good of his country, and his words were truly patriotic. We could take some comfort in the growing willingness of some Turkish citizens, especially scholars, journalists, and writers, to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. In standing for truth against their government, these brave men and women are standing for Turkey's real interests and for the Armenian-Turkish reconciliation, which can only be built on an honest acknowledgement of the past by all sides and by all governments. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this resolution to the committee.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Who wishes to seek recognition? The gentleman from American Samoa, chairman of the Asia Pacific and Global Environment Subcommittee, Mr. Eni Falemavega.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last one.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this is certainly an important but a sobering occasion for this committee to consider this proposed resolution. This is not the first time that this resolution has been brought before the committee and before the Congress to determine whether this institution, if there was a genocide committed against some 2 million Armenians in the years past. Might even be said that there's still a debate among historians about the validity of the claim and what has been made. I recall, Mr. Chairman, a couple of years ago that my subcommittee chaired also a similar type resolution where whether or not some 200,000 Asian women were forced into prostitution systematically by the Imperial Army of the Japanese during World War II. Most of them Koreans, and we even had 2 Korean women and 1 from Australia to personally testify to the atrocities and the abuses that they received when they were under that kind of a situation under the Japanese Army. In that resolution, I recall, we wanted the Japanese government to apologize for this wrong that was committed against some 200,000 Asian women during World War II. I am terribly torn, Mr. Chairman, of the fact that I have just as many Turkish American friends as I do Armenian American friends. I'm somewhat reminded of King Solomon's absolute wisdom when the 2 mothers appeared before him and claiming that they owned the child. And King Solomon said, well, why don't we divide the baby up and maybe that will take care of the situation. But truly the mother who really felt so much love for the child pled with King Solomon and said, no, let the other mother. And then knowingly, King Solomon said, now I know who the real mother of this child belongs to. Mr. Chairman, this is it's a very important resolution, as has been said previously by our members. This is not an easy issue, and I just wanted to ask, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that there's currently an ongoing relationship between Armenia and Turkey, and I wanted to ask the chairman, and I believe this is one of the issues that they're trying to resolve in looking into the facts or the history and all of that, and I wanted to ask the chairman if he has any understanding of that latest development between Armenia and Turkey.
The gentleman yield to me.
I gladly yield.
The gentleman is correct. There are protocols between Armenia and Turkey that, in fact, our Secretary of State was very involved in the diplomatic process that have been entered into. Neither parliament has ratified those protocols, and so they are not currently. The corridor is still blockaded. The commission that the terms of that protocol tried to create has not been established, and actually it is my belief that there's no imminent likelihood that those protocols will be ratified any time in the near future, and one of my bases for saying that is that the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, has said that that essentially these protocols will not be put into effect until the Nagorno-Karabakh issue is resolved.
I thank the gentleman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Indiana, the ranking member of the Middle East and South Asia Subcommittee. For what purpose do you seek recognition?
I asked to strike the last word, Mr.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
My colleague, who's the chairman of the Middle East Subcommittee, said history must be righted, and I totally agree with that. There were horrible things that happened during this time period on both sides. I've debated this issue in committee and on the floor for many, many years. And I say to the Armenians and the Turks who suffered during this time period, they have our heartfelt pain. We feel the pain that they went through in that time period. We can't really feel the pain, but we understand what went on. What I'd like to do is read a little bit about these protocols, because I think it's very, very important. The Turkish foreign minister and the Armenian foreign minister signed 2 protocols on the establishment of diplomatic relations, announcing their mutual desire to establish good neighborly relations and to develop bilateral cooperation in the political, economic, cultural, and other fields for the benefit of their peoples. These protocols would also reopen the border, as the chairman just said, but he says he doesn't think that's going to happen. The protocols also affirm the commitment of both countries to condemn all forms of terrorism, violence, and extremism, irrespective of their cause. And these protocols committed Turkey and Armenia to create an intergovernmental commission within 2 months of the entry into force of such protocols, and within 1 month of the establishment of such commission, to create a subcommission to implement a dialogue on the historical dimension with the aim to restore mutual confidence between the 2 nations, including an impartial and scientific examination of the historical records and archives to define existing problems and formulate recommendations. The historic commission structure specifically allowed for the participation of international experts from third parties. This is a fragile process that deserves protection, as the protocols now rest with the Armenian and Turkish parliaments for ratification. I think that what we're doing today, if we pass this, jeopardizes that negotiation between the Armenians and the Turks. And it certainly is not going to help our relationship with the Turks as well. We all abhor the horrible tragedies of war and the things that happen on both sides. We get criticized for Hiroshima and Nagasaki and fire burning Dresden, Germany, and Berlin during the Second World War. There's no question horrible things happen. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to condemn it. But at the same time, we have to look at things as they are today. Now, right now, we have troops in Afghanistan who are fighting on the border in Pakistan. We have troops in Iraq, which is right next to Turkey. And at Incirlik, we have a base. And that base is in Turkey. And that is an ally of ours in the NATO alignment. Now, this isn't going to help the understanding between the United States and Turkey. As a matter of fact, the last time we went into this, I think the Turkish ambassador went home for some time. And if we pass this resolution, I think it's going to jeopardize the relations we have with Turkey. And I don't think with our troops in the field and knowing that we may have to take some kind of military action down the road against maybe even Iran, we need to have as many friends in that part of the world as possible. And Turkey has been a friend. There's no question horrible things happen. And I see these ladies and these gentlemen that are out here who suffered during that time period. And I read in historical documents about people who suffered on the Turkish side as well. And there's no question that these things happen. But the question is it the right thing today to pass this kind of resolution? What good is it going to do? I don't see that it's going to help anything. Now, the two countries in question are trying to negotiate a settlement, to bring in international experts to look at all the historical facts and come up with some kind of a conclusion. It seems to me that's the best way to let this thing be solved. But for us today to ram this thing through and jeopardize our relationship with Turkey at a time when our troops are in the field and we are in war makes no sense to me. And it has no, and I want to say one more time, we have sympathy for the people that suffered during that time. We understand tragedies occurred. We understand horrible atrocities occurred. There's no question about that. But we're in the 21st century. We have troops in the field, and we run the risk of losing a base of operation.
Would the gentleman yield?
I cannot yield. I'm almost out of time. But we run the risk of losing a base of operation in Turkey that I think is vital to the security of the Middle East and the United States. And I think it's also vital to Israel's security as well. And so I feel very strongly about this. Mr. Ackerman, you and I work together, and we're very close, but we just have a little disagreement on this.
Would the gentleman yield for his final 2 seconds?
Out of time, but I would have yielded had I had.
Time of the gentleman has expired, and I'm asking unanimous consent that the ranking member be allowed to speak out of order in order to clarify a statement.
Thank you
she
so
seeks to
much,
clarify.
Mr. Chairman. I just want to rectify my opening statement. I had said that the administration, in a rather forceful way, had not taken any decision on this resolution, and I've just been handed an AP wire. I'll just read the first sentence. The administration is urging a U.S. congressional committee to hold off on a resolution declaring the Ottoman-era killing of Armenians as genocide, a White House spokesman said Thursday. So I stand corrected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from New Jersey, what purpose do you seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I'll yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from New York to respond.
I thank the gentleman. I was listening to my good friend, the ranking member of my subcommittee, with whom I agree on so many other issues, that if Iran granted us a base and improved relations, would we agree to set up a commission to discuss whether the Holocaust occurred? Yield back my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey controls the time.
Thank you very much. Let me say that I have consistently, strongly supported the recognition that genocide occurred, and I certainly strongly support HRES 252, the affirmation of the United States record on the Armenian Genocide resolution. As we know, this resolution calls upon the President to ensure that the foreign policy of the United States reflects appropriate understanding and sensitivity concerning issues related to human rights, ethnic cleansing, and genocide documented in the United States record relating to the Armenian Genocide and the consequences of the failure to recognize a just resolution. The international community has a terrible record when it comes to stepping up and stopping genocide. We know that Adolf Hitler said in 1939 that when ordering his commanders to go into Poland, said, who, after all, speaks today about the annihilation of the Armenians? And if Adolf Hitler understood that the world never recognized the 1915-1923 genocide, that the world forgot about it, even though there had been some people speaking out during that country, speaking out during that time, he used that as one of the rationales for going with the blitzkrieg through Europe. And so I think that we should certainly remember the past, because the time has come for us to recognize it. Even Voltaire said that nothing is as powerful as a dream whose time has come, and paraphrasing it, nothing is more powerful as the truth whose time has come. Now is the time. Dr. King used to say that the arch of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and the fact that no lie can live forever, when he wrote his letters from the Birmingham jail. And so I think that it's important that we recognize the truth. Truth crushed the earth will rise again, as it's been said. And so with 42 states in the United States of America, if there was even a constitutional amendment, this would have the requisite number of states to have the national record reflect. 11 NATO countries have acknowledged that this has occurred. The European Parliament, which represents all of Europe, has said it. And so I think as the United States of America has stood up to the fact that it's even questioning the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, looking at the legacy of enslaved people for 400 years in this country, where 6 million died in the passage coming from Africa to the Western Hemisphere, and we've acknowledged and have made apologies and have attempted to right wrongs. I think that it's only fitting and proper that we here in the United States Congress should acknowledge. I know that Turkey is a very strong ally. There's no question about it. But South Africa was an ally of the United States, too. And we looked the other way for a long time as apartheid went on, because they were anti-communist. We have to, I think, right the wrong. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. I certainly support the resolution.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
To strike the last word, Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a co-sponsor of this resolution, and I've worked on this issue since I was in the state Senate in California, where I authored a resolution recognizing the Armenian Genocide, the first of any such state. And my resolution passed in California a generation ago. Now it is time for Congress to act. When I was young, I knew a survivor. He was the sole survivor from his village, and he himself would have been slaughtered had not a Turkish neighbor hid him when he was a child. This resolution focuses singularly on the United States record of the Armenian genocide. As the text indicates, our National Archives is filled with thousands of pages documenting the premeditated extermination of the Armenian people. Our own ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau, recalled in his memoirs, and he was an eyewitness to history. So this is our ambassador. He says that the Ottomans never had the slightest idea of reestablishing the Armenians in a new country. He said, knowing that the great majority of those would either, in his words, die of thirst and starvation, or be murdered by the wild Mohammedan desert tribes. Again, to use his words as an eyewitness to history, he said it was a campaign of race extermination of the Armenian people. The United States has been a global leader in promoting human rights around the world. On the issue of the Armenian genocide, however, we lag behind. The French, Swiss, Swedish, Russians, Germans, those governments recognize the Armenian genocide. As a global leader in human rights, it is imperative for the U.S. to stand on principle and recognize the annihilation of the Armenians as genocide. And this resolution does not reference the government of Turkey. It references the Ottoman Empire. The Turkish government was not involved in this. The Ottoman Empire was. It is important that this committee doesn't lose sight of truth versus propaganda, right versus wrong. While the Armenian genocide was the first of the 20th century, the blind eye cast to the slaughter of Armenians was a point, as Mr. Payne pointed out, used by Hitler, who asked, who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? He pointed this out when he was being internally challenged on his policies. The lesson of the genocide is an argument I first learned from my father, who served with General Patton's Third Army and later the Seventh, when they cut through Germany and finally liberated the concentration camps at Dachau. He had his brother's camera, and he documented on film the ovens with bodies stacked like cordwood, the rail cars and trenches filled with the dead in the Holocaust. And still, he finds the need to use those photographs even today as he confronts those who deny that genocide. So history is a continuum. Yesterday impacts today, which impacts tomorrow. It's much harder to get tomorrow right if we get yesterday wrong. The world's strength to oppose killing today is made greater by accountability for actions present but also past. It's weakened by denial of accountability of past acts. Not recognizing the Armenian genocide as such weakens us. For the sake of genocides past and present, I urge the passage of this bipartisan resolution. 1.5 million Armenians were murdered, 500,000 were removed from their homeland. Passing this resolution will be a victory for human rights. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair intends to recognize one more speaker before we recess for 3 votes. It is the chair's intention to reconvene when we come back and proceed through the debate and to a vote without any break for lunch. And the chair does not intend to buy lunch for the members who are here. But the gentleman from New York, do you seek, Mr. McMahon, do you seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek recognition to move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My district of Staten Island and Brooklyn in New York is a deeply diverse district, and it is my own belief that to represent people from all over the world, it is important to bring different communities together and to encourage dialogue. I take great pride in representing families that have broken free from the centuries of nationalist rhetoric and oppression of the old to now pursue peaceful lives in multi-ethnic communities throughout our great nation. I have often sought to encourage communications between Greeks, Cypriots, Turks, and Armenians in my district and around the world. And in particular, I am very supportive of the efforts of Secretary Clinton to help normalize relations between Armenia and Turkey. I continue to advocate for an occupation-free, bizonal and bicommunal Cyprus Federation. I am a proud and active member of the Hellenic Caucus and is the first caucus that I joined when I came to Congress last year. But I see my job as one to build bridges, and so I have also joined the Turkish caucus as well. I am in favor of and resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh issue and look forward to the day when a wave of prosperity and security sweeps over the Mediterranean and the Caucasus. But, Mr. Chairman, I am not naive to think that there aren't some memories and some experiences that are too painful to ever move away from or ever be forgotten. For this reason, I have deep respect and admiration for the efforts of many in this room to address the horrible tragedies and loss of life that occurred during the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. The turbulent years that ended the Ottoman Empire need to be revisited, and the record of atrocities committed during that time and the wounds that were opened continue to this day need to be addressed. But it is hard to heal those wounds and repair the damage if we continue to look back instead of moving forward. No matter how I vote today, history will not be changed. But, Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, if passed, House Resolution 252 would undermine many of these initiatives and also threaten U.S. efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. This legislation would torpedo rather than help efforts to resolve modern-day international conflicts and negotiations involving Turkey, particularly the Turkish-Armenian protocols, which Armenian President Serge Sargsyan referred to as the greatest input of the recent decades in achieving peace and stability in the South Caucasus. Yet, instead of opening up the market between Turkey and Armenia, passage of this resolution will all but ensure that Armenia will remain economically frozen for the near future. Turkey is also a friend in a tough neighborhood. The advice of Turkish officials is well respected and greatly sought after in areas where American ideals are rejected. But most importantly to my decision today, Turkey, being one of a handful of secular Muslim U.S. allies, is also the crucial passageway for our troops in Iraq and a crucial NATO ally. Like many, if not most of my colleagues, I'm a strong supporter of removing U.S. troops from Iraq. In order to do so, we need close cooperation with Turkey to transit troops and equipment across their border. If H-Res 252 is passed and Turkey closes the Incirlik base and its border to our troops, our armed forces will be forced to take longer, more dangerous routes, exposing them to a greater possibility of attack and longer deployments. In addition, Turkey is a partner with the United States in Afghanistan. Armenia is as well. Turkey currently has 1,755 troops deployed. Currently, Armenia has 0 troops deployed. My commitment to the troops is reaffirmed each time I visit a critically wounded young man or woman at Walter Reed Hospital. I would never compromise their sacrifice or risk their lives through an unsuspecting committee vote. 90 years ago, my vote may have been different, but in 2010, much has changed and there's far too much at risk for our own national security. I urge my colleagues to realize the complexities of this legislation and vote against House Resolution 252. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman has yielded back his time. The committee shall stand in recess, subject to call of the chair. I request members return immediately after the last vote is completed so that we can resume debate on the Schiff resolution.
Can I get everybody's attention real quick? If you got, ladies and gentlemen, if you leave, you're going to lose your seat. You cannot save your seat, so you're going to have to wait here. This is about a 25 to 30-minute break on these votes. But if you leave, you will lose your seat. So